It's your playlist? Wait, this is your playlist? It's great, like Saturday morning, like, uplifting.
That's exactly what I was saying. They are absolutely, that's exactly, yes.
But I think that's I know some of this. But like this there is like
Okay.
like they're like the
Like that's hard.
These are mixed. These also include like Capitol Hill staffers who just joined in, like during their lunch break, like yeah, hill turns and stuff. Yeah.
Hello, everybody. We're going to begin the event. So thank you all for being here with us today. I'm just going to quickly just say my name and then we'll do some more in-depth introductions later on. But I'm Abney, and both me and Hiren are going to be facilitating the event and the conversation and discussion today. But we really just want to say we're so grateful for everybody who's physically here in this space right now with us. But we also have a couple people on Zoom. So we're just happy to be co-facilitating and creating this space with everybody here today. I'm going to quickly just go over a sort of lay of the land by doing a high-level overview of the goals of today's event, as well as a little brief agenda. But as you know, we just had our Robert Cole's Call of Lecture and Award honoring Ruby Bridges this past Thursday, which is a really great event. And we're doing Alumni Weekend programming this week currently. So this event is kind of just a combination of this weekend's events and celebrations with current students and alumni, PBHA staff, community members. And yeah, so today we really want this to be a space where we can sort of educate our community about the ruling of the Supreme Court race-conscious admissions decision that came out this summer, also while providing context and historical framing from personal experiences and testimonies with our amazing panelists and speakers, both physically here and also on Zoom. And then we really just wanted to also be a space of reflection and conversation with everybody, again, students, alumni, community members, to kind of just talk through their experiences, their questions, their wonderings about what this means with us, like moving forward with, educational equity and the conversations that are happening with the ruling. And then obviously, and of course, just ideating what that next step looks like together while being in community with one another. But yeah, that's sort of the goals of everything. And the framing is that the framing of the Ruby Bridges conversation and the award that we had on Thursday was together we move forward. And so we want to continue to honor Ruby Bridges' legacy of educational equity and with everything happening right now in the world with the ruling and the historical context that we're in, it just makes sense to kind of create this space and be in conversation with one another to continue that conversation and again, her legacy. But yeah, so we're going to be doing that through some panelist testimonies and conversations. We're also going to have time for pair discussion, all group discussion. So it's really going to be a great space for everybody to tap in when they want to speak up, share again their experiences, your questions, your thoughts, but also hear from our amazing speakers and just learn and be with one another. Yeah, thank you guys so much for being here with us today. And then I'm going to pass it over to Hiren to do some more introductions, like I said, and some framing about the event.
Thank you, Abby. Again, I would like to echo thank you guys so much for joining, and thank you to our remarkable panelists for being here to facilitate this conversation. My name is Hiren. I take the Chief series. I'm a senior at the college, and Abby and I are both really excited to make sure this conversation goes beautifully. So as a brief overview, similar to what Avenue was saying, we're gonna have a bit of context of the case, the proceedings, and generally conversations about race conscious questions over the history. We're gonna start with Matt giving an overview and Myles speaking about what this process has looked like so far. And then we're gonna move into testimonials from student leaders who are part of the original proceedings for receiving testimonials of Harvard students and their experience with affirmative action, as well as students with experience in current advocacy efforts that have kind of made this movement. So with that, I'd like to introduce Myles, Lynk, our incoming PBHA-A president-elect, as well as
That's great.
as well as a lawyer with an extreme amount of knowledge, as well as Matt Cregor, who's also going to help support our conceptualization. And other panelists that will be introduced shortly include Kashish Bastola, Cecilia Nuñez, and Thang Diep. Thang and Cecilia will be joining us via Zoom. They weren't able to be here in person today, but they still wanted to share their perspectives. And then Kashish is here holding it down. And with that, I will transfer it over to Myles.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Kieran and Abinay. My name is Myles Lynk, as you've heard, I'm a lawyer, and I'm going to turn it over to Matt in a minute, but we want to sort of contextualize the decision. And I want to take you back to 1996. I was a lawyer in Washington, D.C., and I was in private practice, but on a pro bono matter. That means donating my time. I worked with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund to write the brief on behalf of minority students at the University of Texas. And this was a case called Hopwood v. Texas, where the affirmative action program at the University of Texas Law School was being challenged by unsuccessful applicants, raising many of the same issues that were raised in the SFFA v. Harvard case. And I want to read to you the first paragraph from the court's decision, because I want to give you a sense of the sort of, if I will, hostility to affirmative action that was a predicate to what was decided in the SFFA v. Harvard case. Quote, with the best of intentions, in order to increase the enrollment of certain favored classes of minority students, the University of Texas School of Law discriminates in favor of those applicants by giving substantial racial preferences in its admissions program. The beneficiaries of the system are Blacks and Mexican Americans, to the detriment of whites and non-preferred minorities. The questions we decide today is whether the 14th Amendment permits the school to discriminate in this way. We hold that it does not. Notice how in that paragraph they use the word discriminates so many times. You can, from the very first sentence, you understand this is going to be a decision denying and telling the University of Texas they could not use affirmative action. That was in 1996. And so the ground was set for what was to come. And we knew that what was to come was not going to be positive. And now let me turn it over to Matt.
Got it. It's a pleasure to be here. It's a pleasure to be here with both of you and with everybody in the room and online, including my old friend Thang. So I'm Matt Cregor. I'm the guy in the picture, only a lot older post-pandemic, but still wearing the same jacket. So it's a pleasure to meet you. I'm a staff attorney at the Mental Health Legal Advisors Committee. We're a state agency under the Supreme Judicial Court of Massachusetts that's dedicated to promoting and advancing the rights of those with mental health needs. I'm here because I have been in this work for a while, first as an attorney with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund that has really fought hard for this strategy from its inception. And then second, I had the great pleasure of working with and then representing the students who sought intervention in this case to stand up for affirmative action, race-conscious admissions when I was at Lawyers for Civil Rights. And it was in that capacity that I had the great pleasure of getting to know Thang and some of the other folks we're going to hear about today. So So what I want to flag for you, first, has anybody had the headspace or the indigestion space to actually read these decisions and their concurring opinions or any of that? Raise your hand if you've, okay, raise your hand if you've read a news article about this, right? Okay, that's right, because this captivated all of us, right? So my job is to try to provide a little bit of the legal context and background for how we got to this place, and to just briefly describe the decision itself so we understand the court's reasoning, because we'll use that backdrop to hear from our current and former students about how well this holds up and what we can do going forward. Right. So with that in mind, if looking at this decision or reading about it in the newspaper wasn't surprising, raise your hand, right? The outcome wasn't surprising. Okay, yeah, all right. But at the same time, if this felt a little jarring, raise your hand, right? And it probably had to have, right? Because just 7 years prior, our Supreme Court had said the opposite in a similar case in Texas. And in fact, if any of this feels unmoored from precedent or ahistorical in nature, I'd offer that that's because that's what we've always done when it comes to the pernicious combination that is racism and the law in this country, okay? If you go back to our founding documents, which are supposed to be guiding documents on the principles of liberty, right, and order, right, we start by denying citizenship, right, and the humanity of anybody who is not a white man. And when we get to determining how we balance power in this country, we start by giving more power to Southern states by counting Black people as 3/5 of a person for the purposes of determining how many Senate and House seats there are. Right? So we start from this fundamental contradiction in this country of a constitution that's supposed to enshrine the principles of liberty, but can't do it for everybody who is human. And very quickly, after fighting the bloodiest war our nation has ever faced, we have a 13th Amendment that eliminates slavery, except for the unique instance where you can use forced labor for those who are in prison. And so immediately, our southern states began to impose the Black Codes, laws that basically allowed the South to arrest any Black man that they could in order to have forced labor return to a society that was based entirely on forced labor before the Civil War. When that wasn't sufficient to regain statehood in the United States, we had a 14th Amendment that was to guarantee equal protection. But as soon as that period was done, we had a US Supreme Court say that separate but equal was okay under equal protection, just eliminating and undercutting the entirety of the 14th Amendment itself. And then it took 50 years to get to the decision in Brown versus Board of Education, right? Our most critical decision that says separate but equal is never equal. But we only get there not because of the rigorous lawyering that Thurgood Marshall and the NAACP Legal Defense Fund undertook, but because the court was willing to cite its whole ruling on the basis of some social science research about the stigma that Black students face based on studies of what happens when you present children with dolls of different races, right? So if we ever thought that the law was neutral or objective or purely grounded in reason or, existed in the abstract, it doesn't. And that's I think, the best context that we can offer for the decision that's before us today. So it's not surprising to me that the court was willing to turn its back on both longstanding and recent precedent, but that's what it did. So how did we get here? In the 60s, after Brown versus Board of Education, the federal government undertook affirmative action efforts to remediate places like government contracts where women and underrepresented racial minorities had never been represented. Right? And it's impossible not to see the tie to racial and sex discrimination that led all of these contracts going to white men and the companies that they owned. And with that, our colleges and schools of higher education undertook the same approach, including the use of numeric racial quotas so that the classes would be more racially diverse than they were immediately prior. Thereafter, in the 1970s, particularly in 1978, our Supreme Court began to undertake a full review of these sorts of practices. And in the Bakke case, the Supreme Court rejected all of the reasons that we'd used affirmative action before. And it held that the admissions program at the University of California was unconstitutional because it relied on quotas and set-asides and was denying students seats based on race. But one justice of the Supreme Court said, we can justify the use of race in a very limited circumstance when it comes to admissions to elite institutions and selective institutions like these. And it's the interest that a university has in promoting diversity because of the benefits that flow from it. Now, if you asked Justice Marshall, Justice Brennan, or any of the more liberal justices on that court, the whole purpose of the 14th Amendment and equal protection was to remedy these forms of societal discrimination, right? Not to limit things to simply the benefits of diversity. But that's what the court did to change the game in this space, right? And we've been playing that game ever since 1978. Okay. Real quick on the rules of that game. Anytime race is used in awarding or taking away a benefit or what have you, anytime race is used as a factor in any decision, our courts are wont to apply strict scrutiny. Strict scrutiny says that if you're using race as a factor, it has to be done to further compelling government interest, and the use of race has to be narrowly tailored to do so. So for the last 45 years, the fight has been over if promoting diversity is a compelling state interest, then how narrowly tailored is it? So fast forward 25 years to 2003, the US Supreme Court upheld the use of race as one factor in a holistic admissions process at the University of Michigan's law school, but the same day said that the undergraduate policy that awarded a numerical bonus to underrepresented racial minorities was unconstitutional at the University of Michigan's undergraduate campus. Fast forward another 10 years to the Fisher case in Texas, where Edward Bloom enters the picture, the architect behind the current lawsuit that just succeeded. The court articulated a deference to schools in how they determine diversity, but they have to show how their plan is narrowly tailored. And in 2016, the court determined that that's exactly what Texas did, that it had narrowly tailored its admissions process, where race was used as a factor of a factor of a factor to create and promote a diverse class and student body. So with this as the backdrop, Edward Bloom built a suit that relied on the language of the dissents in those cases to attack the diversity rationale. And that's exactly what happened. So very quickly, this suit is a tough one because we have this long-standing precedent that goes back to 1978, and truly a precedent that goes back to the 14th. That talks about the remedial role of the Equal Protection Clause. Right? And we also have recent precedent from Texas in 2016 that says you can use race as long as you do so in a narrowly tailored manner. Rather than reckon with either of those two things, the Chief Justice basically says, well, what Harvard and UNC have done in creating admissions policies that they've used, they've asserted interests that may be compelling, but they're not significantly measurable, right? We can't tell how well promoting diversity improves future leaders, promotes understanding, facilitates the type of society that we want to live in. And because of that, it's also not sufficiently connected to the plans that they've used to admit students to their campuses. The court also says that in reviewing the plans that Harvard and UNC Chapel Hill have set up, the schools have used race as a negative, right? And that's tricky because in just 7 years before, the court had affirmed that you could use race as a positive, right? Meaning it could be one of the factors among many that a court could consider in reviewing the constitutionality of an admissions plan. But the court did a little bit of a flip and said, admissions is a zero-sum game. So if one student gets a plus, that means another gets the negative from it. So race is being used as a negative in these plans. And as a result, you cannot use race the way these schools are. And finally, the court said that even if the purpose of this was to remedy some kind of past discrimination, there's been no logical endpoint to these plans, and these universities have articulated none that would allow us to see when affirmative action could end. So we're ending it here. And that's where I'm ending my remarks.
Well, I just want to thank you, Matt. That was a terrific summary, both of the history and of the holding. I would just add 2 points. When the court said that the universities disadvantaged some racial groups, that it was a negative, that they said it employed racial stereotypes by treating the fact of an applicant's race alone as saying something meaningful about their experiences. And we're going to talk a little bit about that later. And then, of course, they said there was no logical endpoint. In the Grutter decision, one of the justices, Justice O'Connor, had said that she expected affirmative action to end within 25 years. And so, and Chief Justice Roberts alludes to this in his decision. But for the takeaway from that is, if this decision had not been rendered in 2023, it's likely it would have been rendered in 2028. I mean, from the Supreme Court's perspective, particularly given the most recent justices confirmed, appointed by President Trump and confirmed by the Senate, affirmative action was on life support. And I think that's it. Also, it's worth noting that the decision itself, the justices were very understood how important it is. You had over you had 6 different opinions. You had the majority opinion written by the Chief Justice. You had 3 dissenting opinions, and you had 2. You had 2 dissenting opinions, and you had 2 concurring opinions. So the justices understood how significant this was, and you had 3 concurring opinions and 2 dissenting opinions. So it was a very contested and significant case, even within the court. And now I'd like to turn to our student members of the panel, both here and online, to talk about your experiences in defending affirmative action. Kashish, why don't we start with you?
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Kashish. I'm a sophomore at the college. It's great to be here with everyone today. Good morning. Thank you for coming. Thank you for the high-level overview and going into some of the intricacies that kind of led us to this moment. I'm definitely coming at this issue from a much more limited perspective. I haven't had a long career with anything in that relates to affirmative action, but I definitely have been thinking about it for quite a while now. I would say my first engagement with the issue of affirmative action began in high school when I learned about the Fisher versus University of Texas case, which is very important for a lot of Texans, since it was kind of our futures on the line. A lot of us were thinking about what that would mean. Many of our teachers were talking about it and how it would impact us. So that was how I was introduced to the idea of affirmative action in the classroom. And then we did a moot court activity where I was supposed to defend the University of Texas and their admissions program. And from there, it just ended up being a lot of research over, the next couple of years, until I got to my senior year of high school, when I would have to apply for colleges myself. And that's when I started getting engaged with the NAACP Legal Defense Fund, which was working with a lot of Harvard student groups and alumni groups to put together an amicus brief that would be submitted to the Supreme Court, but also to arrange a lot of advocacy that students would be taking lead on campus and also in DC in the months leading up to oral arguments as well as the decision. So that's kind of how I guess I got involved in the issue itself. I think the reason why it's important to me though is because I'm Nepali American, which is a minority even within the Asian American community here. And it felt like SFFA was speaking for my community, the Nepali American community, but also for so many other communities within the Asian American community that just could never feel represented by Ed Bloom and the actions that Students for Fair Admissions were taking to destroy a program that had actually built a place for people like us at this institution. And this narrative that Asian Americans are somehow disadvantaged by affirmative action, when you can see throughout the years, ever since Blackie, the number of Asian Americans at Harvard and other elite schools have just risen every year to the point where about a third of the class of 2027 is Asian American. So there's clearly a lot of misinformation that's been going around on this issue. And I found many stubborn Asian Americans my freshman year who just would have a really difficult time, I guess, thinking about, the real facts behind what this case was about. And there were a lot of conversations that I had with my entryway freshman year and with, so many different members of the Asian American community, whether they were, under or I guess disadvantaged minorities within the Asian American community or underrepresented in the Asian American community, or whether they were well represented on our campus. And for me, it was a lot of explaining statistics. Like, did you know Nepali American women make 52 cents for every dollar that an Indian American woman makes, or for every 81 cents that a Chinese American woman makes? So there was a lot of learning and relearning that a lot of, I think, the Asian American community on campus was going through over the past several years. And I think a lot of people were able to, I guess, shift their perceptions on the case itself, because over time it did become very clear that SFA did not really stand in the best interests of Asian American applicants or students. Of course, we do have to confront the reality that there are stereotypes, and there was discrimination against Asian Americans in many different admissions committees across the country. And specifically, you can see in the court documents for the UNC case that there was discrimination where it was kind of assumed that an Asian American student would have a higher test score. And I think that those kinds of stereotypes are also very damaging to Asian Americans. And I think any type of stereotype that tries to put us into a box, into a monolith, that tries to enforce the model minority myth is detrimental not only to Asian Americans, but to all of us. And for me, though, I think it's never made sense as to why we would try to fight these Asian American stereotypes in an issue like affirmative action that has actually benefited us, because these, although we can pull out these individual instances where Asian Americans are being discriminated against, these are things that are happening outside of admissions as well. And I don't think attacking affirmative action was ever the right way to go about seeking civil rights or, protection against discrimination for Asian Americans. And it just shows that was never really what this case was ever about. It was always about getting Black and brown students out of these schools, about setting us backwards. And I think it really never was about education equity or equality and opportunity, like what SFFA was saying. And I in history class, we always talked about Brown versus Board of Education. And, the fact that we're here now in 2023, I mean, I can say, even reading through the court's opinion, like what you said, it's clear that affirmative action was on a lifeline for a very long time, ever since Spaki. And the fact that affirmative action could only exist for the past several decades to produce diversity rather than fulfilling the original meaning of the 14th Amendment, which was to be a race-conscious remedial measure that would take race into account in order to give a leg up to those who need it most in our country. I mean, you know, we've come so far from the original promise of the 14th Amendment, the original promise of Brown versus Board of Education. So for me, fighting for this was always also a reckoning with our nation's history and what these provisions in our Constitution, what this precedent really actually means, and trying to bring back, I think, what I see as the truth. And it was so great. I met so many people along the way working with the Legal Defense Fund as well. I was able to, through the organizing efforts of the Affirmative Action Coalition on campus, which is a group of so many different student affinity groups that came together, we really, you know, bolstered the importance of storytelling. So I got to hear why affirmative action was important to so many different communities. I learned that Harvard, in its original charter, has a distinct obligation to the Massachusetts people and to educating students who are Indigenous, which brings a whole other layer of the responsibility that colleges and universities have in creating a just society and in bringing educational opportunities to marginalized communities. So I think, yeah, I'll leave it there.
Thank you very much. Cecilia, can we hear from you?
Sure, can folks hear me?
When we pivot to Zoom, it'll take a second to avoid lag. So if we go Cecilia and then Thang, maybe we can repeat the same order for the next question. So that apologies a bit echoes.
I just want to check, can folks hear me? Thanks, Byron. And it's connecting it. Can folks hear me now? Awesome. Can the room hear us now, or are we good? Okay, great. Hi, so my name is Cecilia Nuñez. I take she, her, hers. I graduated class of 2020. Right now I'm at UCLA doing a master's in social welfare and public policy. A big thank you to everyone for inviting us out. I said Craig was reminding me of my LGBT health policy class right now. I was like, I know strict scrutiny. Yeah, so I guess some background information. Me and Thang both signed on to an affidavit letter back when this case was in the Massachusetts state courts. So we've kind of been with this case since it's been at the state level, following it since it's been going to the Supreme Court. And I think some big, or I guess I was with Fuerza Latina at the time. So Fuerza Latina and several organizations were asked to sign on to an affidavit letter talking a little bit about affirmative action, but I think also kind of honing on some of these points that were being brought up around the ways in which Harvard still has a lot of ways to go in terms of supporting students of color on campus. And affirmative action is one piece of that, right? But there's a lot of other things I think students wanted to bring to attention and kind of try to leverage in that moment. And so I think some big takeaways from me for the case, I think that it's very obvious that there's a lot of conversations we're still very uncomfortable having in this country when it comes to race and ethnicity, right? I think a lot of ways that this decision represents what we all know, which is that we're still very uncomfortable naming inequality in the country, discussing inequality, looking at the ways that that's still a real part of people's lives. I feel like in some ways this decision represented an opinion that's in popular society that believes that things are currently equal, things are currently all solved, and we don't need these different procedures. And even at the time, I think as like a Latin American studies major, we were so behind the rest of the Americas when it comes to what affirmative action really actually looks like. And I think that's large parts the ways that we're really silent in this country about a lot of history. I think we're seeing that especially more right now. And I think it made a lot of conversations really hard. I'm from a community that's predominantly Asian American. And I think I always grew up with people asking me if I thought I got into Harvard because I was a double minority or because of this or because of that. And I think that it made it very clear that we're not having good dialogues about what's going on with admissions. We're not having good dialogues about solidarity. I think the ways that was just brought up in the ways that affirmative action helps a lot of Asian American communities, especially Asian American communities that are already currently underrepresented at colleges. It didn't talk about the ways that we all benefit from being able to talk about race in our essays and our admissions, which obviously people still can do. And I think that that's going to be an important narrative going forward. But there was a lot of ways I think that this was going to hurt a lot of communities of color across the board. And I really think that SFFA didn't come at this caring at all about Asian Americans. Or if you look at the history of the lawsuits that they brought forward, I don't think that anyone over there actually cares about Asian Americans being able to go to college or not. I think, like we said, they care about Black and Brown and Asian students, I think really being less at colleges. And I think that for me, it makes it so that when I think about kind of steps going forward, I think about the solidarity that we need to start creating and the conversations we need to start having. And I think it's some of the ways that we need to dismantle some of the larger systems that exist around these elite universities, right? Something else I think that really came out of this case was a real conversation about legacy admissions and just the ways that this really is not a fair process across the board, even necessarily to give preference to students of alumni, but especially to give preference on the basis of fundraising. That's something that we've really never questioned in Harvard's history. And yet it's the basis for a lot of people being in the room. And I think that that's something that we're really going to have to address and talk about if Harvard wants to put their money where their mouth is on this and say that they really care about DEI and they really care about creating an environment for students of color. I think it also brought up a lot of the ways that students feel very unprotected on campus and students feel very unsupported once they get here. So I think part of the conversation was really around saying, you can't just bring students here, right, and then not support them, right? So even if we were in a place where we had a great process of holistic admissions, Harvard still isn't doing a lot for students of color once they're here. And I think that's still also part of the conversation. So yeah, I think a lot of the takeaways for me, I think I was raising my hand saying I wasn't that surprised when the case came out. Because I think I knew we all were following and knew where this was going to go. I think that it's really scary from a legal side. I think I was talking about just how much precedent is being lost on certain things and just thinking about the ways that it seems that this court is going and the liberties that they're not protecting. But yeah, I think it was an interesting time. I think I also learned a lot more about just the legal system in general and what does the process of legal advocacy look like as one pathway. I think a lot of times, maybe especially in the PBHA space, we talk a lot about community organizing and that form of advocacy. So I think it was interesting to look at legal advocacy as another possible route on certain issues. And I can give it over to Thang.
Thank you very much, Cecilia. Thang?
Hi everyone. I'm Thang. I take he, him. Y'all can hear me? Yes. Okay, cool. Yeah, I graduated in 2019 and yeah, as I mentioned, we got involved a while back. And so yeah, it feels weird to be back and talking about this. And a long time no see, Matt. I think for me, like as like Asian American, and I also identify as like Vietnamese and Southeast Asian. And so similar to what like Kashish, please tell me if I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Earlier, that I think this case for me was like really like for me about Asian Americans being used as like a wedge to divide communities of color. And I think it was like really important to have like Asian American voices who do support affirmative action, who do recognize that like the narrative that Asian Americans are being discriminated against is really tied to like the model minority myth and all these other things that say like, oh, Asian American made it because they simply work hard. And not like, and that does not take into account all of like the lived experiences, the race, like the racial experiences that we have that like shape our identities. And so I think like for me, like that was like my main motivation for going in, and also to highlight like the Southeast Asian experiences, because I feel like in a lot of like the Pan-Asian American narrative, it's revolved mostly around East Asian, and it raises a lot of, see like the narrative makes Asian American as a monolith versus like really acknowledging like the diversity within the Asian American community. And I think, yeah, after the Supreme Court decision, I think it's been making me think a lot about this idea of like a zero-sum game. I guess like, why are we all fighting for scraps? Why are we fighting for like 3% admission rate? Why are we fighting to get into these elite universities that, only like a few of us like actually have access to resources? Like, it really makes me think about how can we build like a better education system that where like no matter where you go, no matter where you end up at, that you have equal resources to succeed. And then it also like made me reflect on like how programs like our youth program at PBHA, our mentoring program at PBHA, like unfortunately, like we live in a reality currently where we don't have, like not all these schools have these resources. And so like, how can we invest time and resources and money into these programs to at least try to level the playing field just a little bit. Yeah. But yeah, I feel like Cecilia and Kashish like really sum up a lot of what I was gonna say already.
Very much, and we're gonna open it up in a bit to get more views, but right now we want to pause and turn the page. The Supreme Court has ruled, and it is the final decision maker on constitutional questions. And it said that the use of race, as was used in the affirmative action policies at Harvard and the University of North Carolina, were inappropriate and unconstitutional under the 14th Amendment. And so the question for us now is, where do we go from here? How do we move forward? This isn't the end of affirmative action. This is simply the end of using that method to achieve affirmative action. And that's the positive spin we have to put on this. We cannot say about this means the end of minority enrollment at a significant level in institutions of higher learning and in selective institutions of higher learning. That can't be our response. We've always met challenges. We've always responded to challenges. This is another challenge. Matt, I want to ask you, what are your thoughts on how we move forward?
Oh, and then one pause to.
Yes, okay. And we're back. So I think we have several paths forward. And Myles, you plan to speak to the guidance from the right. So let's just flag a couple, right? One, I think we have to be mindful of the continued attacks first, right? Edward Bloom is not done. He's already filed another lawsuit against the Fearless Fund, which is a venture capital fund in Atlanta that is promoting and supporting Black female entrepreneurs, right? And so he's using this decision and the colorblindness within it to go after what he sees as affirmative action in the workplace, right? And he's starting there. So we're not done playing defense, okay? But in terms of offense, we have a host of things that are available to us. First, I want to talk about maybe the scraps in the opinion, right? Chief Justice Roberts says you can continue to use race in admissions only in the sense that you can speak to it in your narrative statements about how your race has impacted you, right? What adversity you've overcome. You can speak to basically the content of your character, but it's only in that context that you can speak about the color of your skin. And that's, to me, let's start by saying this is patently offensive, right? Like that you have to, the only way that you get to talk about your race is in this context, I think, does an injustice to who we are as people, to who we are as communities, and to what each community has faced, what also each community has celebrated, and what each community is as a whole, right? But apart from that, like there is room for any university to consider a student's race in the way that the student considers it, right? So there's room within that for universities to be mindful of what students bring from the perspectives they've experienced on the basis of their race. Right? There are also a host of race-neutral considerations that are broader, right? That relate to the neighborhood you're from, the community you grew up in, the socioeconomic status of your family, all of which can add to the diversity of a college class or a graduate school class, and may ultimately result in racial diversity as well. Right? So there is room under this current opinion to pursue diversity from those angles, and that's part of what we have to do.
Exactly. They also mentioned in the opinion, institutions can continue to pursue targeted outreach,
Yes,
recruitment, pipeline or pathways programs that try to work with students from secondary school and even primary school to get them into colleges. And often those programs are based on the racial or ethnic identity of the students. In my home institution in Arizona, for example, a lot of pathways programs work with Native American students to try to get them into colleges. And they say they can take that into consideration because those programs relate to how did race affect you and your socioeconomic status growing up. So there are these ways institutions can continue to utilize. They also said institutions can continue to have as a goal promoting diversity.
Right.
That is a goal they can maintain. They simply have got to show that the methods they use to achieve that goal don't violate what this majority has defined as the 14th Amendment's prohibition on the use of race at all, even in a positive way. From the from the students' perspective, I'd like to get Kashish, Cecilia, and Thang to talk about as they go forward, both undergraduate and as recent graduates, how they feel their roles can be affected going forward to promote and protect affirmative action.
Yeah,
Kashish?
I was just going to add to, I think there is a lot of opportunity that I see from the ruling. And specifically, and I think a lot of it is hypocritical, but Chief Justice Roberts talks about the importance of disaggregating the data when it comes to Asian Americans, or when it comes, he pokes specifically at the fact that Harvard doesn't even really have a category for Arab or Middle Eastern students to pick. And there are so many ways in which we can use this opportunity to really move forward. Disaggregation is something that underrepresented minorities within the Asian American community have been advocating for so long now. And it's funny that Chief Justice Roberts would be the one to bring that up, but it also points us to questions that we've been having in more recent years on campus about how many students within the Black community are actually generational African Americans who are the descendants of slavery. How many students are how many of the international students are actually just the elites in their home countries that are coming here and not really bringing much diversity. And especially as a low-income student who comes from a working class background, studying here on full financial aid, I am also coming from a perspective of how do we break these systems that, perpetuate generational privilege, like legacy admissions, like, Dean's List admissions, athlete preferences for boutique sports, like, squash, that my high school and no high school around me in Texas would ever have. So there's so much room for improvement. And ever since walking onto Harvard's campus last fall, I think I've just become so disillusioned, because I really did genuinely think this was a very diverse school. But I think it was just so hard for me to not only make the academic transition to college, but also the social transition coming from my background or coming from my community, because I realized that a lot of, and it's not wrong for, people of color to be wealthy, but I realized that a lot of the students of color around me, especially the Asian American students, were actually coming from very wealthy backgrounds that I could not relate to at all. And it just made me really think about what did Harvard mean by diversity? What do we all mean by diversity? Do we just mean rich people of color? Do we just mean continuing this aristocracy, but making it look a little better, making it a few shades darker. And to me, that really never was what diversity or affirmative action should have been about. So that's something that I know I'm going to be fighting for moving forward, is an intersectional diversity. And I know that that's possible right now because the Supreme Court made it clear that there is nothing in the opinion that should make us believe that colleges should be unaware of race when looking at students and looking at applicants. So there is a room for us to, hopefully, probably not with this court, but down the road, look at education rights and opportunity with an intersectional lens that looks at race, looks at class, looks at how all of these different systems work together to keep students and keep communities away from opportunity, away from schools like Harvard. And at the end of the day, even if a lot of the students, most students in this country will never get into an elite college because of how this, the system is built, at least, I personally think that every student should at least be able to dream of a future where they're able to have the resources that Harvard students have. And I think that's really what this is about for me, is like, how do we have recruitment programs and pipeline programs that would actually allow students to dream in the robust ways that most of the students coming from like the most elite prep schools in this country are able to dream of their futures.
Here. Yes, right, yeah. Cecilia?
Yeah, so I think.
Is there anything
I
you'd
think
like to
that-
add as well?
Yeah, I think a lot of points, well, let's see, we're waiting. Okay, I think people can hear me now. Okay, awesome. So I think we hit a lot of the great points in terms of kind of working within the school for admission. So I think I want to pick up on what we're kind of talking about in terms of what can be done outside of it. Because I think in some ways, I do see Harvard as a racially diverse school, having now gone through a couple graduate admissions programs and going to rooms where they were like, this is such a diverse class. And I looked around, even knowing what I knew at Harvard, and going, this is not diversity. And so I think students of color are always going to be on campus, whether people want to fight that or not. And I think that's why we really have to think about what are the protections that exist for students once they get here. In a lot of ways, I really think Harvard is behind even a lot of our like local state colleges when it comes to things like ethnic studies, when it comes to things like having a multicultural center. These are things that are no-brainers at a lot of different universities that Harvard is still dragging its feet on. And that's part of this larger culture where people are feeling unprotected and unsupported. Even in years where we're having, I think, the first majority minority classes, people still feel really alone and unsafe on campus. And that's not by coincidence. And so I think it's going to look like really pushing Harvard to at least make sure that for the students that are going to be on this campus, that it is going to be a good experience for them. It's going to be a place that's safe for them. We're seeing a lot of criminalization of students right now, right? I don't feel like this is necessarily a place where I would tell a lot of students of color, progressive students, that they should want to come to this school right now because it feels really unsafe in a lot of ways. And I think that we need to think about what we can do to support that. I think it's a really great point to think about. What does it even mean for us to be advocating for elite universities and affirmative action in those spaces in that ways? Thang and I grew up in the BRI programs together, or doing the BRI programs, counseling together. And I think for us, it really just was true, right? All of our students are not going to get to a place like Harvard. They're not going, and that's not necessarily all of their goals. And I think that that's something that we should really be cognizant of in our youth work. So I will say, I learned a long time ago as a youth worker, not everyone wants to go to college, and that's okay. And I think, as we said, people should still be able to have the resources to be able to be successful and thrive in life, no matter the pathway they go. I feel like in a lot of ways, this opinion represents a sentiment that I think is really felt in a lot of immigrant communities, that if they can't get their kid into these top 3 schools, they're not going to be set up for the future. I think we really have to kind of disrupt that narrative and make sure people understand that we need to be working to create pathways for everyone, right? It's not right that the only people who are going to be able to make it out are the ones who are going to go to med school or go to law school. And so, yeah, I think just really kind of thinking more about what can we be doing to support students on that level, and how can we be fighting for that as well.
Thang?
I honestly have nothing to add. Y'all said it all.
Add something. I'm looking around the room. I think I'm the grayest person in the room. I came to in in 1967, and I came from the South Bronx. I remember getting on a bus at the Port Authority bus terminal and with my trunk and coming up here and getting off at in Boston and then taking a cab to Pennypacker Hall, which was my freshman dorm. And Harvard today is so different in its undergraduate community than from what it was then. It was overwhelmingly white, overwhelmingly prep school, private school. I had a friend of mine at Radcliffe once said that from her prep school, 12 members of her class were admitted into Harvard. Coming from a public high school in the Bronx, that was inconceivable to me. I couldn't even imagine that. The Asian American community here was very small. It was very small. And so, and the Black and Hispanic communities were very small, very small. You knew everyone in those communities in your class. So there has been positive change, which is a good thing. The question is, has it been enough? How can we maintain it? And in fact, how can we increase it? And so those are the challenges we have, because all of us are empowered now as a recent graduate, as an older graduate, as a soon-to-be graduate, to try to ensure that the minority participation, the diversity enrollment at Harvard and at other elite institutions, and one could argue at all institutions of higher learning, does not diminish. And so I want to turn it back over to Kiran and to work as we sort of expand this teach-in opportunity to the group at large.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Myles, and thank you to all of our panelists for really remarkable work. Really so thankful to hear from you all and the expertise you bring. And we also wanted to hold space to acknowledge that this recent decision and the impact it's had resonating across campus, the impact it's had across the country, has impacted everyone in this room in a unique way. And we wanted to make sure that there's space for all of us as participants, as community members, to share how this decision has impacted us, how affirmative actions or a belief in diversity and the value of educational equity really means something to all of us. I think listening to Ms. Ruby speak on Thursday night was remarkable in so many ways, and it really helped me think about how we all have a shared commitment to belief in creating a better world, creating a more connected community. And so we've been left with some amazing ideas and remarks about how we can move forward together. We also have opportunities to think about, how did that make us feel, and how could we as a community heal together in order to. So with that, I'd love to open the floor as kind of an open mic for anyone to share about their experiences, or if they have any reflection on their own college experiences and how diversity was moved.
I'll share. So I graduated a class of '93, and I remember one of the first events that I came to as a freshman coming on campus was with the Black Students Association, where they kind of take you in. And one of the things that they told us was to always have our ID, because you're going to be questioned as to whether you belong on campus. And I was like, wow, okay. And we literally had, when Cecilia was talking about the safety thing, that popped into my head, and I was like, wow, we're still dealing with that? We had a whole thing, I want to say maybe in '92, or it might have been my senior year, where we had, the Black students had to have a meeting with the Harvard police about how we were being treated on campus. So it saddens me that that is still apparently an issue. So that's one of the things that just listening to everyone speak, I'm like, wow, that was in '93 and we're still doing that. The other thing about diversity within our class was most of the Black students were from prep schools. Like I was an anomaly. It was me and one other guy that were from the public school. Everyone else was from, so they were all of money. So even though they were,
I would say just because you went to prep school doesn't.
well, yeah, they got scholarships and things like that. But our educational experience was completely different. We actually were asked by Harvard to come the summer before freshman year. And we had to take classes because they didn't know we could handle it. That's what they said. Because we were from public, and I wasn't from a great public school. I was from an urban public school. So when I got here and I kept hearing about just meeting other Black students that were on campus and the schools that they went to and some of the things that they had been exposed to. Harvard was important for me because I had never been exposed to a lot of things that other students had been. But if that is still the case, there's still not the diversity within even our communities, that's still an issue. So I love that you were bringing that point up too, because I don't think a lot of people understand that they're even within, even though you might see a lot of different races, we still aren't as diverse.
Fair enough, too.
Thank you anyway.
Anybody else, either on Zoom or here in the room, particularly among the students who are here now? Yeah, all the way in the back there.
Yeah, so I think for me, growing up in California, I grew up in a very, my name is Forrest, by the way. I grew up in a very small agricultural town with a lot of Southeast Asian people and communities. So coming to Harvard specifically, I expected there to be a large Asian population, but I was really shocked how small and how much of a minority the Southeast Asian population here is. You know, I'm Hmong American, so my parents are refugees. They came from the Vietnam War, and I think even just trying to find community here has been such a difficult problem, such a difficult time for me. Just because of how, like she said, Harvard has never really disaggregated their data. And I think that's been an issue among all elite institutions. I have a lot of friends at Stanford who are also Hmong, and they've been advocating for that as well, where there's kind of this misleading show of there being such a big Asian population, when in reality, there's it's such a broadly used term that does not really quite encapsulate many of the communities. So I'd say the Hmong experience is very different from the East Asian experience. And I think even trying to cope with that, there's only one other Hmong person who could like that. And her experience going to boarding school and even being of generational wealth has been vastly different for me. I think there's almost this feeling of like alienation, not just being like the only person of your community at a place like Harvard, but like trying to find any sort of connection or relatability within the student population at Harvard.
You had, I'm sorry. Thank you.
Mercedes, because class of 90, definitely again, similar experiences. My parents boarded with people, grandparents, I was in first generation born in the US, first person in my family graduated high school, to college. And so there were, arriving on this campus and trying to find your way, right? Like trying to go to La Felicitación, and really recognizing, wow, most of the students in Palo were sons and daughters of professionals on the island, not necessarily coming from like working class or background. And so there is that sense of like, oh wow, and realizing my own experience, my own lived experience of just like, I grew up in Gary, Indiana, and so it was in New York, there was a majority Black community. And I was like, wow, most of the people though working, like most of the people in my circles were working class.
folks, and so that there was this, again, intersectionality of race and culture and class. But like, one of the things that I distinctly remember as I was following this case, was just the comments that people who, you're kind of getting to know people and you're sharing their share. And it's like, oh, you're quite an anomaly here, or, oh, they didn't let my friends in because they let people like you in.
Right.
And so I think like that's partly the attitudes that need to be addressed. Like there's who gets othered and who belongs, and who feels like they're entitled to their spot here, and who is like, well, you're being here took a spot away from somebody who was more
Right.
entitled and more worthy of that spot, and not looking at the amount of work that you had to do with fewer resources to have the same opportunity. So that's like, how do we have that conversation? As that goes beyond like, the racial representation, which is also very important, because I really feel that these kids that are being brought are very anti-Black. It's anti-Black racism, and we just have to call it what it is.
Thank you. Elizabeth?
Hi everyone, my name is Deanna's not here right now. Really great story in this entire and a whole here. I think really awesome story in these spaces. Affirmative action, I think, is a particularly frustrating concept for me to have realized it's really being revoked through our space being attacked by blue and other spaces. Because I think about what the before and the after of affirmative action is. When we talk about how affirmative action is supposed to be used as a means of leveraging there we go. Leveling the playing field, and not just for diversity. How it's really tokenized for diversity. As I'm looking at the shirt that I also own that says Defender of Diversity. What emphasis we're really placing on that, and who is diversity really for? Because diversity isn't for me. Diversity is for people who haven't had the experiences that I have, to look at me and say, "Oh wow, they're different," and feel bad about themselves or feel good about themselves, while I still, and many like me, still have to reckon with what our realities are, irrespective of what diversity means. And I think about how affirmative actions, it lets people through the door, but it doesn't take away from the experiences of lesser resources, of extreme poverty, of isolation that comes with knowing that you are a minority within a minority. I also have that experience as well. And it also doesn't take care of realities of getting to Harvard with fewer resources and still having fewer resources and still having to navigate diversity, knowing that the playing field was really level just because I got admission. And so when I think about that, and in response to affirmative action being on a life support and now essentially on its way, I don't want to speak so negative. It is really good. I think about all the challenges that I had to mitigate and navigate on my own in order to even get here. And I'm also from Texas, really diverse, not socioeconomically though, but a diverse nonetheless, in terms of race, community where when I was trying to get into colleges, I was actually told by several academic counselors in my high school of 6,000 students, by the way. So that if I wanted to apply out of state, that I would have to find a research on my own because our school did not provide for getting the tutoring, for the essay reading. It didn't provide for even just a brochure to schools like Harvard because they were out of Texas. And that was just how the education system in my school was, and it was for a lot of people that live
on one side of the street. The red line is still very real and it permeates every community where Black and brown people live. And getting here was not, with a consciousness that affirmative action was, giving me a leg up. So coming here and realizing that it is such a big part of the conversation that students have when they talk about race, really just I thought I was forgetting here, by pulling at my own bootstraps. And kind of that humbling experience really wasn't something that I thought was gonna happen, and I feel like it might be a real situation that a lot of people have to face if they're even allowed here. Now that race-based consciousness is not some of those constitutional or and that's just not, I think, where the country needs to go. I don't think it provides a lot of space and access for a brighter future where diversity is not just the extent to which we really begin to talk about what race is in this country and how progressive racism is. And I want to be hopeful because I think that, I don't know who it was that mentioned it, but that the ending of race-based consciousness in admissions just means that we have to find another way to make sure that our Black students can have access to not just elite institutions, but generally speaking. And I really want to get to that place of where our focus is and to ensure that that there's no pathways for success, and that thinking about what students are experiencing before college and as they are in college is also at the forefront of those conversations, and not just getting through that threshold or getting that admission.
Yes.
Can you wave so the camera is?
Hi, I'm like, what am I doing? Morning everyone, my name is Angel, I'm class of 08. I think about that sometimes. I regularly remember like when I was president of PBHA, and then I they add 1 year because that's when I actually graduated. Which says a lot about like how much this means to me, how much this means to me. I think it's someone who has moved in and out of who's moved in and out of New England several times. And going back to the community where I grew up in, so I'm Filipino American from Southern California, where there are not a lot of like people who graduated from elite universities, right? I have come to represent that for my community, and I feel really comfortable with this, right? Because what I thought was like really interesting about my experience at Harvard, right, is like I was feeling a lot of this like. So I'm Filipino American, I'm Asian American. I came from a very strong Asian American community, very like lots of solidarity and like lots of like really meaningful conversations. And then I come here, it's a very different experience. And just the very question of like, wait, the Philippines is in Asia? It's like, yes, it is in Asia. And by the way, that's actually not like just like based on geography. That's actually not how the Asian American identity is constructed. It's also based in the civil rights movement, right? And like, yes, the Filipino Americans were at the table, and the whole point was to make this like very inclusive identity. So that is very a historical perspective on like who we are. And it is a, an intentionally like cultural and political like identity. And having to remind people of my own community of that is like a really interesting experience. Anyway, so my point being, going in and out of like New England, where there aren't a lot of like Harvard people, like for example, in California, but I've also lived in other places around the country. People love to bring up that I went to Harvard. There's the whole like, I went to some school, like some small liberal arts school in Cambridge kind of deal, right? People love to bring it up, and then all of a sudden I get asked a lot of questions like, what is it like? And it's like, well, how honest can I be, right? Because for a lot of people, this place does represent like social mobility and social climbing. And I definitely did, I have like benefited from that. Coming from a working class family and now being like a physician, like I am the model minority like poster child that they want to put on every like admissions for sure. Racially ambiguous, right? Like whatever, like put them on the thing. And then my med school, I am on every like my face is on everything. without my consent, by the way. And then, so I get stuck in this like, how honest can I be? And Cecilia brought this up, I think, that do I encourage people to follow their dreams, but then have to prepare them for like that really uncomfortable social experiment? Do you want to be that next person? Like, do I offer you up to the altar of like social mobility and social and social climbing? Or how do I prepare you for that, right? If that's something you do want to do. Or do I tell you like, no, you need to stay like in your community and like figure it out there? Obviously, like, that's really up to the individual, like what they want to do in their lives. But it puts me in that really uncomfortable position. How much do I have to explain in the 2 minutes that I've like not met this person? And I think like, I think I have someone in the back brought this up too. What ends up doing, I realized like, oh, I'm like just a wedge in this like much larger, like anti-Black, like kind of like issue, because like they're just trying to, it feels like they're just trying to put the spotlight on like my community, when the real issue is like we're still trying to reckon with like other like racial historical issues. And I'm kind of putting things, and so always being like feel like thrown into the fight that I didn't even realize I was actually a part of. What I will say was actually been kind of hopeful, if I can. So when I was here, I didn't actually have the terms data disaggregation. Like I knew it was a thing, I knew the concept basis, I knew it was important, but I didn't know how to express what was going on. And then since then too, like, since I'm also very interested in education, I've learned other terms that that are important in my community. I didn't have those terms, and to be honest, I think it's the first time I've actually heard the term data disaggregation used correctly in Harvard space. So props to the students actually. And so I guess it gives me a little hope, at least like the vocabulary it exists and people are talking about it. Because I don't know if I've ever been able to put words to like what I was experiencing, at least as eloquently as like the first students were doing. So so I think that's also like something maybe to look forward to, is that like now at least there's a language that's useful for explaining. And I guess my question is always like how much homework do I need to do, right? I will say I think that like as a Filipino American, I think in terms of like our time has kind of come. Like Ube is like really cool. Everyone knows what the Doban concert are now. Great. I've been waiting for this moment for a really long time, but I recognize I have other members in the Asian American community where they haven't had that yet. And so like what do I like how much homework do I need to do basically to figure that out? And all my fellow Asian Americans in the room know like we have a lot of like other like racism like homework to do as well. So so thank you to the students actually for continuing to teach the alums like what's next and like how we can get better. It's like that's what really means a lot to me.
Time for how 1 or 2 more calls. Thank you all.
I just make one comment. I've been struck by a lot of the comments about how, and Elizabeth, you made this point, and others have as well, how you did too, Ayana. When you're here, you get people say, well, you're here, you're taking the place from somebody else who should be here. And back in the 60s, we didn't hear that. And it struck me how different the time is that you're here. Back then, people in the white community, the broader community, were willing to say, we need to open up. We have been so close. And that was the height of the civil rights movement. I was here at Harvard when Martin Luther King Jr. was shot and killed. And institutions understood that their history of racism, whether intentional or not, meant that they needed to open up to Black, to Brown, to Asian. And so there was much more of a welcoming. Now, that didn't mean that you were helped along. Well, one of my enduring memories of being a student here was one of loneliness and just trying to navigate the system. But you didn't have people resenting your presence. In fact, they were grateful for your presence because it's made them feel good. So you see how good we are. We've let these Black and Brown and Asian students in. And I'm struck by how different your experience is. I don't know how I would react if somebody said to me, well, the fact that you're here meant that my friend couldn't, who was more deserving than you. I have to say, I know I'd be angry. What I do with that anger, I'm not sure. But I mean, that has got to be, that has got to be a stressful experience to go through. And you're right, that's something we need to address as well. That's something we need to, in 2022, I gave the alumni address to the Black convocation here at Memorial Church in October. And I said, in that, if you're here, by definition, you deserve to be here. The admissions committee made a decision that you should be here. You didn't make that decision, they did. That means you deserve to be here. And that's what you tell people. You never apologize for being here. You deserve to be here, and you have the opportunity to make the most of your experience here. And that's the only responsibility you have. Make the most of this experience. Drink it to the lees and take from it everything that you can take from it. And the idea that you've got to apologize to someone for being here, hell no. But I have to say, I can only imagine the anxiety produced when you have to confront that kind of comment from others. So.
Against parents who are doing very questionable things
Right.
to get their students in, right? And so again, it's like this. It's, you know, this idea of who's entitled. Because limited spaces, so that the extent to which people Supreme Court, because they feel like they don't give their kids better.
And just to add one more story to that, I forgot to mention this earlier, but on the day that the Supreme Court decision came out, I flew to DC that morning, and I had just arrived to the Supreme Court, and there were not that many students, but there had been a pretty large mass of parents, specifically Asian American parents, who were mostly Indian American or Chinese American, and they had gathered with signs. They were all affiliated with SFFA, and they were celebrating the decision. And they, over the next couple of hours, we did get a lot of students to show up at the Supreme Court. A lot of them were Hill turns. A lot of them were actually, there was like about 7 or 8 of them just working for the Congressional Black Caucus. And there was just like, over time, like, we started, chanting. We had our Defend Diversity signs. And there was a point in time when the Asian American parents came and started kind of harassing the students. And there was specifically a South Asian mother who was harassing a Black girl that was just standing right next to me holding up a sign and putting a camera in her face, all of this. And I was just so disillusioned. And I confronted her. I was like, how could you as a South Asian mother do this to us? Like, I'm South Asian. You think you're fighting for our community, but you're not. How, and then I started realizing there is something generational to this. There's class components, generational components, and the entitlement that these parents feel that their kids have to a seat at an institution like this is bizarre to me, because, and I think all of it is perpetuated by what Thang said about a zero-sum mindset. Like, no one is ever entitled to a position at an elite school. Let's just start there. And then and to assign race to that and be like, oh, the reason why I got in is because of race, it implies that for some reason white or Asian students have belong here, that they were entitled to see, that they deserve this. But we really need to get out of that mindset. And I think that's one of the most dangerous things, one of the most dangerous ways that we can look at admissions, because it really is, about, the role that Harvard and other schools have in alleviating inequality and opportunity. And that's, again, just going back to what I think what Brown really all was about. And I will always, I brought this up in my tribute to Ruby Bridges. I think we have strayed so far from what Brown gave us, which was that education is a fundamental right under the 14th Amendment, and that needs to be protected at all costs. Because obviously, when our Constitution was ratified, there was no compulsory attendance for public schools. We did not have the education system that we have today, but we're in a moment right now where I think we really need to think about what value does education really have in our society, and how far are we willing to go to make sure that everyone has access to it, no matter what zip code you're coming from, no matter who you are, everyone is entitled to an education. And personally, that's where my eyes are moving forward. And I really do think it's possible for us to return back to what Brown promised us, but I don't know how far we are from that.
Yeah.
So with those remarkable words, I think I'll bring us to a close. Sorry, camera, I'm here. Anyway, I'm here, I'm sorry, you can see. But thank you guys truly for coming, for listening. Thank you panelists and community members for sharing your experiences. Wow, yeah, I think, Myles, I'm gonna take that hell no with me, that, you know, I don't owe anyone, especially in my final months here, I don't owe anyone anything beyond, you know, standing here and making sure that each minute I spend at this institution is working to further my community and working to further our collective cause.
You're here.
I'll take that. I'll get that with me. In true PBHA fashion, if you had a couple more minutes, or I'm gonna encourage you guys to do, and Zoom people to unmute in your little, you know, virtual space as we head out, to think about what you guys would commit. I'm gonna think as we walk out, and if you're going to the alumni mentoring lunch, as we go to the lunch, think about how we can individually commit to continuing this mission and continuing this movement to assure a truer diversity, a truer vision of educational equity. What can we do as individuals to continue that value and live it each day? I think we owe it to, you know, the remarkable words of Ms. Bridges, to the work that is done by our alumni, by our current students, and by our broader community, to see how we can each contribute to that larger goal. So I'm gonna hold that with me. I'm gonna ask that you guys, if you see a friend and want to share a little bit of that reflection as we head out, I'd ask that you do that, because I think that's important. To vocalize a commitment to this work means to make it a little bit closer to making sure that's actually. So with that, unless Ebony or Jacob, you have anything. Thank you guys so much.
Thank you guys.
Right?
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Beautiful.
And you were terrific.
You were terrific.
No, I wasn't. You gave a wonderful introduction and historical review.
I love what you did to connect what you said at the convocation to what hope we have coming out of this decision. And that's like, because these are the folks who are going to carry us forward.
Yes, they are.
That's exactly what we all need to do.
Yes.
So
please email me. I
did.
Okay.
So it's a joy. So nice
Thank
to
you.
meet you, Myles.
Thank you.
Oh, wait, can we take a picture?
Okay.
Like, yeah, of you guys, and then we take, yeah,
Thank you, Josephine, for joining. Thank you.
Good lunch. Where's the
I believe it's just a PBHA.
Parlor room?
Yeah, so it's PBHA.
Who's invited? I mean.
Everyone, I think it's
Alumni,
students.
students,
Everyone.
alumni.
Okay.
Wait, I'm gonna move this to the one link.
It's nice to see you again.
Okay. Does everyone want to just like?
Yes.
Hello, everyone.
Yes. Oh, wait, I don't know what makes. Okay, here, yes. Cass will kill.
Well done. Well, you'll be great at that. That's what I do.
Just here.
Right here, okay.
Okay, just in the middle, you know, don't tower. I feel like we should turn it off because it's like.
In our business.
Yeah. Okay, here.
Alright, we're gonna try to get a little closer together. Cause it will be a better shot. So I have from Elizabeth on is pretty good. Maybe Emily, but there we go. Have me squish in there. Okay, this is gonna work. Okay. 1, 2, 3 PBHA. Ready? 1, 2, 3.
Yeah. Let's take a selfie with Kiewit. Yeah.
I'm sure, that's not gonna work. She's taking a selfie.
Wait,
Or 0.5.
I don't know.
What do I do?
just put your finger on the volume button
The volume button?
and then go like that. And yeah. And,
Oh,
and press. And
Oh,
but look
yeah,
at the
Okay.
Wait,
I don't know what's happening.
Like if she stayed up
No, no.
there.
Okay.
She doesn't have
Can
that.
we turn it
Oh yeah, let's do
like,
it 7. Then let's do it like that. And then press the volume.
oh, wait.
This,
Okay.
okay, I'm pushing this to the
Perfect.
top volume button.
All right.
Yes.
Okay, smile, I don't know what we're doing.
Okay,
Okay,
let's see
let's
what
do it.
happens.
Yeah.
People in the job who were in their 50s and 60s. And Angel looks at me and goes, I'm so glad, I'm 27. I think it's 27. I'm 26, I'm so glad you're here, you're younger. You have to be good at technology.
Yeah, because you told her perfect.
See, Karen, I knew
You did it.
You delivered.
This whole team is doing whole communities inside PBHA work service to the community and install.
Yeah. I'm done with it.